The evening began like any other quiet night in the Bennett home. The air was cool, the sound of light rain brushing against the windows, and the faint smell of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen. Claire Bennett stood by the stove, lost in thought as she stirred the sauce. Her daughter Lily had called earlier, asking if she and her husband Daniel could come over for dinner. It had been a few weeks since Claire had seen them, and though she always looked forward to their visits, tonight she felt an unusual sense of nervousness she couldn't quite explain. Claire was in her early 50s, graceful and kind, with a soft smile that made people feel at ease. Her husband had passed away nearly 6 years ago, and while time had softened the pain, loneliness still lingered in the corners of her heart. Her days were filled with gardening, volunteering, and the occasional book club meeting, but the evenings were often silent. That's why she always welcomed company, especially her daughters. The sound of the doorbell broke through her thoughts. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door to find Lily and Daniel standing there, both carrying umbrellas. Lily, bright and full of life, stepped in quickly and hugged her mother. Daniel followed, smiling politely as he closed the umbrella. He was tall, with calm eyes and a quiet presence, the kind of man who didn't talk much but made people feel heard when he did. "Mom, it smells amazing in here," Lily said, taking off her coat. "Good," Claire smiled. "Dinner's almost ready." Daniel gave her a polite nod. "You really didn't have to go through all this trouble, Claire." "Please," she said lightly, "cooking for family isn't trouble." Dinner went smoothly at first. They sat around the small dining table talking about work, travel plans, and Lily's latest photography project. Daniel mostly listened, occasionally adding a thoughtful comment or asking a question. Claire liked that about him, his calmness. He was different from most people she met, grounded and gentle. But as the evening went on, she noticed something. Daniel seemed distracted, distant even. He smiled when Lily spoke, but there was a weariness in his eyes, something quiet and unspoken. Claire tried to ignore it, but she'd always been good at reading people, especially the ones she cared about. After dessert, Lily excused herself to take a call upstairs, leaving Claire and Daniel alone in the kitchen as they cleared the dishes. The sound of rain outside grew louder, filling the silence between them. "You two seem busy these days," Claire said, handing him a plate to dry. "You hardly visit anymore." "Ha!" Daniel gave a small laugh. "Yeah, work's been a lot. And Lily's been traveling more than ever. It feels like we're always moving in opposite directions." Claire nodded, feeling a twinge of sadness. Marriage can be hard sometimes. Life gets loud. You stop noticing the quiet things. He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes searching hers. "You understand that, don't you?" The question caught her off guard. "I suppose I do," she said softly. "When my husband was alive, there were times I felt like we were living separate lives under the same roof. It happens before you even realize it." "Ah." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to understand that now." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but heavy with understanding. Claire looked away, pretending to tidy the counter. She didn't like the strange warmth that crept into her chest. She told herself it was just empathy, the kind that comes when someone shares a piece of their struggle. But something about the way he looked at her made it feel different. Lily came back downstairs a few minutes later, cheerful as ever, breaking the stillness that had filled the kitchen. "Sorry," she said, smiling. "That was my editor. I have to fly to Portland next week." Daniel said nothing, just nodded. Claire noticed the slight slump of his shoulders, but Lily didn't. She was too caught up in her excitement. Claire smiled politely, masking her unease. When they finally left that night, Claire walked them to the door. Lily hugged her tightly. "We'll come again soon, Mom. Promise. I'll hold you to that." Claire said warmly. Daniel gave a soft smile. "Thanks for dinner, Claire." "It was perfect." "You're welcome," she said. "Drive safe." As they stepped out into the rain, Daniel glanced back once, just for a second, his eyes meeting hers under the porch light. It was a small look, nothing more than a passing moment, but it stayed with her long after the door closed. She leaned against the wall, listening to the fading sound of the car pulling away. The house felt quieter than before, emptier somehow. She tried to shake the feeling, but his expression, that quiet sadness in his eyes, wouldn't leave her mind that night. Claire sat alone in the living room, a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea in her hand. The clock ticked softly in the background. She thought about Daniel, how polite he was, how he always seemed careful with his words, how his eyes held stories he never told. She didn't want to think about him, but she couldn't help it. It wasn't romantic, not even close. It was something else, a strange recognition, a mirror of her own loneliness reflected back at her. She told herself it was only concern for her daughter's marriage, only worry for Daniel as a person. But deep down, a quiet part of her heart whispered that it was more complicated than that outside. The rain began again, steady and soft. Claire looked toward the window, watching the reflection of the streetlights shimmer through the glass. Somewhere in that stillness, she admitted to herself that something had changed that night. Not between her and Daniel, but inside her. It scared her a little. The idea that she could still feel something so vivid after years of numbness. She hadn't planned for it. She hadn't wanted it. But life, she thought, had a way of stirring emotions you thought were gone forever as she turned off the lights and walked toward her bedroom. She glanced once more at the empty dining table. The plates washed. The candles burned out, the echo of laughter still lingering faintly in the air. She sighed, forcing a small smile. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. "It's just a feeling." But even as she said it, Claire knew it wasn't true. Something had begun that night, not love, not longing, but the slow awakening of something she didn't yet understand. And though she didn't know it, that quiet dinner would be the first step toward a story she never saw coming. A week had passed since that dinner, but Claire couldn't shake the memory of it. Every small detail from that night seemed to follow her the way Daniel's eyes lingered for a second too long. The heaviness in his voice, the silence that had stretched between them. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, just her imagination playing tricks on her. But the more she tried to push it away, the more it stayed. Life went on as usual. She tended to her garden, met her friend Martha for morning walks, and went grocery shopping like always. But somewhere inside, something felt unsettled. She told herself it was just the quiet catching up to her again, the kind that often visits when you've spent too much time alone. It was Thursday evening when she heard the knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the windows. And the house was dim except for the warm light from the kitchen. Claire opened the door, and to her surprise, it was Daniel. "Daniel," she said, startled. "Is everything all right?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Hey, Claire. Sorry to drop by unannounced. Lily's still out of town, and I was driving and ended up here." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. "Of course. Come in. You look like you could use a cup of coffee." He walked in, brushing rain from his jacket. Claire led him to the kitchen and started making coffee. The air was filled with quiet hums. The coffee machine, the sound of rain, and the faint creak of the wooden floor. She glanced at him as he sat down. He looked different, worn out, distracted. He nodded. "Yeah, work's been crazy. And Lily, she's busy, you know. I guess I just didn't want to go home to an empty house tonight." There was something sincere in his voice, not dramatic, just quietly honest. Claire placed a cup of coffee in front of him and sat down across the table. "I know the feeling," she said softly. "Empty houses have a strange way of getting louder when you're alone." He looked up, meeting her eyes, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt full, like both of them understood exactly what the other meant without needing to explain. Claire tried to change the topic, bring some lightness back. "Do you still like your job at the firm?" He smiled faintly. "It pays the bills. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just living the same day over and over." She nodded. "That's life for most of us. But every once in a while, something changes everything." He chuckled. "You sound like someone who's seen a lot." "I suppose I have," she said. "Life teaches you patience and how to start over even when you don't think you can." He studied her face, the calmness in her tone, the warmth in her eyes. There was something grounding about her presence. She wasn't trying to fix him or fill the silence. She was simply there, real and kind. Time slipped by icily as they talked. What started as casual conversation turned into stories about childhood. Dreams they never chased and quiet regrets they never voiced aloud. Claire hadn't opened up like that in years. And Daniel seemed genuinely interested, not just listening, but understanding. At one point, she noticed the clock. "It's late," she said softly. "You should get going before the roads get worse." He nodded but didn't move right away. Instead, he looked around the kitchen, the faint smile still on his lips. "It's peaceful here," he said. "Your home feels safe." Her heart caught at the word safe. It wasn't something she had heard in a long time. She stood and walked him to the door. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. When he stepped onto the porch, he turned back to her. "Thanks for tonight, Claire. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk." "Anytime," she said with a kind smile. "Drive safe, Daniel." He hesitated for a brief second, like there was something else he wanted to say, but then simply nodded and walked to his car. When the door closed, Claire leaned against it, feeling that strange weight in her chest again. It wasn't wrong, she told herself. He was just family, her daughter's husband, and he'd needed someone to talk to. That was all. But deep down, she knew there was something she didn't want to name, something she was afraid of even admitting to herself. Over the next few days, they began to exchange small messages. It started innocently enough. Daniel texted to thank her again for the coffee. She replied with a simple, "You're welcome." Then another message followed. "You're easy to talk to." That one lingered a little longer in her mind. She told herself not to respond right away. But she did sometimes. Talking to someone outside the situation helps. And so it began. Little by little, their conversations grew longer. They talked about books, about places they wanted to visit, about things they missed before life got so complicated. Claire tried to keep it light, but there was something beneath the words. Quiet connection forming in the spaces they didn't speak about. One evening, while she was watering her plants, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel again. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" The message read. Claire stared at it for a while, unsure how to respond. Finally, she typed, "Yes. More times than I'd like to admit." That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because of guilt, there was nothing inappropriate in their words, but because she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. She felt seen, understood, and that scared her. 2 days later, Daniel came by again. This time with an excuse he'd left his jacket in her car. Though she knew he hadn't, he looked uncertain when she opened the door. Like he wasn't sure if he should be there. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said. "Of course not," she replied. "Come in." They sat in the living room this time, with soft music playing in the background. The air between them was quiet, but charged with something unspoken. Not desire, but recognition. Two people carrying loneliness that looked the same. As he talked about his struggles with Lily, how she had grown distant, how he felt invisible in his own home. Claire listened carefully, her heart aching for him, but also for her daughter. "You love her," Claire said gently. "I do," he said. "But sometimes love feels like holding on to a memory instead of a person." Oh, that line stayed with her long after he left that night. It was a truth she knew too well. When the door closed behind him, Claire sat on the couch, her hands trembling slightly. She knew something delicate was forming between them, something neither of them had asked for, something neither of them understood. It wasn't wrong yet, but it wasn't right either. She looked out the window at the rain falling once again and whispered to herself, "Don't let this go too far." But deep down, she already knew life rarely listened to what the heart tried to forbid. Days turned into weeks, and what began as small, casual moments between Claire and Daniel started to feel like something neither could easily define. They weren't doing anything wrong, at least that's what Claire kept reminding herself. But the quiet understanding they shared had grown into something more noticeable, something neither of them could ignore anymore. Lily was still away for work most of the time, flying between cities for her company's expansion project. She'd call her mother once or twice a week, her voice tired but cheerful. "Daniel's fine," she'd say whenever Claire asked. "He's keeping busy." What she didn't know was that he had been spending more evenings at Claire's house than at his own. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced again, holding a small box of pastries from a local bakery. "Thought you might like these," he said with a smile. Claire hesitated for a second before stepping aside to let him in. They sat by the window, the golden light of late afternoon filling the room. It was peaceful, too peaceful. They talked about simple things, his work, her garden, the upcoming fall season. But underneath the light conversation, there was tension, soft but undeniable. "You've been quiet lately," Ko said after a pause. "Just trying to keep myself busy," Claire replied. "That's what happens when the house gets too quiet." He smiled faintly. "I like it here. It doesn't feel quiet when I'm around you." Claire looked away quickly, pretending to straighten the napkins on the table. "That's kind of you to say, but you shouldn't be spending so much time here, Daniel. People might misunderstand." Key leaned back, studying her face. "Do you misunderstand it?" Her breath caught for a moment. "I know what this is," she said softly. "You're lonely. You and Lily are going through something, and maybe I remind you of stability." "Maybe," he said, his tone lower now. "But it's more than that. You listen, Claire. You see people really see them. I haven't felt that in a long time." She wanted to tell him to stop, to keep boundaries clear, but the words didn't come. Instead, she forced a weak smile. "You should try talking to Lily. That's where your heart belongs." He nodded, though his eyes said something else, something that made her heart ache and flutter at the same time. That night, after he left, Claire sat alone by the fireplace. Her thoughts raced, torn between guilt and something that felt like a quiet longing. It wasn't romantic, she told herself. It was simply two lonely people finding comfort in conversation. But she also knew that feelings had a way of slipping past reason when you least expected them to. A few days later, Lily called. "Mom, Daniel mentioned you've been helping him with some home stuff. Thank you for that. He's been under pressure lately." Claire froze. "Oh yes," she said quickly, trying to sound natural. "Just some little things." Lily laughed softly. "You're the best. You always know how to take care of people." After the call ended, Claire sat there feeling the weight of those words. She didn't want to be part of anything that could hurt her daughter. But she couldn't deny the truth. Daniel had become someone she thought about too often. That weekend, Daniel didn't show up. Nor did he text. The house felt emptier than usual. Claire told herself it was for the best. But she still found herself glancing at her phone now and then. 3 days later, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, Daniel was standing there, looking tired but relieved. "I needed some time to think." He said. "You didn't have to explain," Claire replied softly. "Maybe it's good we keep some distance." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think that will change what's already here?" She shook her head, forcing herself to stay calm. "Daniel, we can't cross a line that can't be undone. Lily loves you." "I know," he said quietly, "and I love her. But that doesn't make this—" He stopped himself. "Forget it. I shouldn't have come." He turned to leave, but she reached out instinctively, her hand brushing his arm. "Daniel," she whispered. He looked back, his eyes filled with something she couldn't describe. Sadness, longing, confusion, all at once. For a brief moment, neither moved. The world outside was silent, except for the soft wind rustling the trees. Then Claire slowly pulled her hand back. "Go home," she said softly. "Please." He nodded, his voice barely audible. "Good night, Claire." When the door closed, she stood there for a long time, her hand trembling slightly. It was an attraction she felt, not in a youthful way, but a deep emotional pull. The kind that comes from being seen, from being understood after years of quiet. That night, she couldn't sleep. Memories of her younger years filled her mind when love had felt simple. When she'd been a wife, a mother, a woman with dreams that still had color. Somewhere along the way, Life had taken those colors and replaced them with quiet shades of duty and acceptance. Daniel had reminded her of the warmth she thought she had buried long ago. The next morning, decided to end the cycle before it went too far. She wrote a letter, short but heartfelt. Daniel, you are kind, and I care about you deeply. But this connection we've found can't grow into something it shouldn't. Lily is my daughter. You are her husband. We both know where the lines must be drawn. I will always wish you peace, and I hope you find it with her again. Claire. She left the letter at his doorstep and drove to the lake that afternoon, the one she used to visit with Lily when she was a child. The air was cold, but it cleared her head. She sat on a bench, staring at the water, and whispered, "This is the right thing." That evening, Daniel called. She didn't answer. Instead, she let the phone ring until it stopped. A message followed, "I understand. Thank you for being honest." The following weeks were quiet. Lily returned home full of stories and plans, her voice bright and hopeful again. "I think Daniel and I just needed some time apart," she said one afternoon, smiling. "We've been talking more lately. Things feel better." Claire smiled back, her heart heavy but relieved. "I'm glad to hear that, sweetheart." She realized then that what she and Daniel had wasn't meant to last. It was a moment in time, something fragile and fleeting. It had taught her something important, though, that even after years of silence, the heart still remembers how to feel. That night, as she watched the sunset from her porch, a sense of peace settled over her. She had made the right choice. Love wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about letting go before it broke something precious. In the soft light of evening, she whispered to herself, some connections aren't meant to be lived, only remembered. And for the first time in a long while, Claire felt at peace with the quiet. The morning air was cool when Claire opened her curtains. The world outside seemed peaceful, but inside her heart everything still felt heavy. It had been 2 months since she'd last seen Daniel. Life had slowly returned to normal, at least on the surface. She busied herself with gardening, reading, and helping at the local library. Yet there were moments when a quiet ache crept in, reminding her of what had happened and what she'd let go. Lily and Daniel had started mending their marriage. Claire could see the change. They laughed more, spoke with warmth again, and when they visited her on weekends, Daniel seemed calmer, more grounded. Claire was proud of them, but also quietly emotional. Watching them together sometimes hurt, not because she wanted what they had, but because it reminded her of what she had lost long ago, a deep connection, the kind that felt like home. One Sunday evening, as rain tapped softly on the windows, Lily and Daniel came over for dinner. Claire had cooked pot roast, Lily's favorite. The house was filled with warmth and the smell of rosemary and baked bread. It was the kind of evening that made everything feel normal again during dinner. Lily talked about her work, her laughter echoing around the table. Daniel mostly listened, occasionally meeting Claire's eyes with a polite smile. There was no tension, just quiet understanding. It wasn't awkward anymore. Whatever had been between them was acknowledged, accepted, and left in the past. After dinner, Lily went to take a call in the other room, leaving Claire and Daniel to clear the dishes. The sound of rain mixed with the clinking of plates. "Claire," Daniel said quietly, placing a plate on the counter, "I never really thanked you for what you did." She looked up. "You don't need to thank me, Daniel. I only did what was right." He nodded. "Still, you could have made things complicated, but you didn't. You helped me find clarity. I think you helped Lily and me more than you realize." Claire smiled faintly. "I'm glad to hear that. You two belong together. She's a good woman. So are you," he said softly. The room fell silent for a moment. The sound of the rain grew louder, the thunder rolling in the distance. There was no longing in his tone this time, only respect and gratitude. Claire could feel that something in him had healed. And in a way, so had she, when Lily returned. The three of them sat by the fire and talked about simple things, movies, small town gossip, their plans for the holidays. For the first time in months, Claire didn't feel conflicted or uneasy. The storm outside was fading, and somehow, so was the one inside her heart. That night, after they left, Claire stood by the window, watching the rain ease into a drizzle. The streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, and she felt a calm she hadn't felt in years. She knew she had done the right thing. Love wasn't always about passion or desire. Sometimes it was about kindness, restraint, and letting someone find their way back to where they truly belonged. A few weeks later, Lily invited her to dinner at their house. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. When Claire arrived, she noticed small changes, fresh flowers in the vase, laughter in the air, and Daniel waiting at the door with a smile that was different now, lighter. "Come in," he said. "Lily's just finishing the salad." The evening went beautifully. They ate, reminisced about old memories, and Lily teased Daniel about his poor cooking skills. Claire laughed genuinely, her heart warm with affection. Everything that had once felt fragile now felt strong again. After dinner, Lily excused herself to answer another work call. Daniel walked Claire to the door as she prepared to leave. "I wanted to tell you," he said, his voice calm. "Lily and I are planning a trip next month. Somewhere quiet, just the two of us. We needed this fresh start." "That's wonderful," Claire said sincerely. "You both deserve it." He smiled. "We wouldn't have reached this place without your honesty. You saved more than you know." Claire looked at him, a soft expression on her face. Sometimes life brings people together for reasons that aren't meant to last. But even short connections can change us forever. I'm glad ours did. He nodded slowly. "So am I." They said goodbye, not as to people who almost crossed a line, but as to who had learned something from it, something about love, boundaries, and the quiet courage it takes to walk away from what feels right but isn't. As Claire drove home, the night sky was clear, the moonlight spilling across the road. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. She felt free, like she had finally closed a chapter that once frightened her to face. When she reached home, she brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window. She thought about all the phases of love she had lived through: the early passion of youth, the stability of marriage, the quiet emptiness of widowhood, and now this unexpected connection that had awakened something she thought was gone forever. But instead of regret, she felt gratitude. Because love, she realized, wasn't always about possession or promises. Sometimes it was about two souls meeting at the right time to remind each other that they were still alive, still capable of feeling deeply. Months passed and life found its rhythm again. Lily and Daniel's marriage grew stronger, and they visited often. Claire watched them with quiet pride, knowing that the choices she had made protected something sacred. One afternoon in spring, Claire received a small letter in the mail. It was from Daniel. Inside, there was a simple note. "Dear Claire, I just wanted to say thank you once more. That season of our lives changed me. It reminded me to value what I already have. I'll always remember your kindness and the calm way you showed me what love truly means. I hope you're happy." "Daniel." Claire read the note twice, her eyes soft with emotion. Then she smiled, folded it neatly, and placed it in her drawer beside old family photographs. That evening, she went outside, watching the golden light of sunset spread across her garden. The air was warm, filled with the scent of lilacs. She felt peaceful, content, and quietly proud of herself. Life hadn't turned out the way she once imagined, but it had taught her something far deeper: that love doesn't always have to be returned to be real. Sometimes it's enough to have felt it, to have known it, and to have let it go with grace. As she sat there, the wind brushed gently through the trees, and Claire whispered to herself, "Every story leaves a mark, even the ones that end quietly." And with that, she smiled softly, peacefully, finally at home in her own heart.